is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones. In these chapters, oh boy, I have no idea what's going on. I did chapters 12, 13, and 14. And we find out that Cat he had 9 lives. Now he's down to 3. Cat's been busy. And also they turn out to be related. How about this? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Very, very big thanks to Patricia for commissioning this episode. Patricia, unfortunately, emailed me just before I started here and told me that she wasn't going to be able to make it today because her employer sprang a mandatory meeting on her. And I was just so appalled that her job did not seem to have its priorities straight and understand how deeply important this was and that she needed to be here. But yeah, so hopefully, that once you get a chance to listen to this, Patricia, you will enjoy. So yeah, this section is jam-packed. I have to say that I'm really surprised at how many questions have been brought up now that we've got, 2 chapters left in the book? There does not seem to be adequate time to wrap things up. And I'm thinking back, and part of my issue with, what was the previous book to this one? Dark Lord of Darkholme. As well as Fire and Hemlock, actually, now that I think about it, was that they seemed to be rushed at the end. So I'm a little apprehensive that that's going to be an issue here again. I guess we'll see. And I don't want to, leap to conclusions on that, but it just feels like there are an awful lot of balls in the air for 50 pages to adequately address everything that I want to know. And it's possible that this is the first book in maybe a short series that's based on this, this crew. And if that's the case, then that would be a lot more understandable. And that would not be the first time that I've covered something for Spoil Me thinking that it was a one-off and then found out that it was part of a series. So that's possible, but I don't know anything about that. So if anybody has information on that as to yes or no, let me know. When we wrapped up the previous chapter, there is this fight between Julia and Janet, except that Julia thinks it's Gwen, and they're in the middle of this when Mr. Saunders comes in, and everything had gone down with Cat turning Euphemia into a toad. I say turning with an asterisk because he didn't. And he is summoned to Crestomancy's office. So chapter 12 starts off. Crestomancy's study was a large sun-filled room with books in shelves all around it. There was a desk, but Crestomancy was not sitting at it. He was sprawled on a sofa in the sun, reading a newspaper and wearing a green dressing gown with golden dragons on it. The gold embroidery of the dragons winked and glittered in the sun. Cat could not take his eyes off them. He just stood inside the door, not daring to go any farther, and he thought, he has found out about the dragon's blood. Crestomancy looked up and smiled. Don't look so frightened, he said, laying down his newspaper. Come and sit down. So I really enjoy this description of the chair that Cat has to sit in. It's a deep sloping chair. Cat slid backwards down the slippery leather slope of its seat until he found he was having to look at Crestomancy from between his knees. Oh my God. I have sat in this exact type of chair, and there is nothing quite so undignified. I swear to God. There are 2 kinds of chairs that I find really perplexing. And it's chairs that are angled like that and are made out of a really slippery fabric. It could be leather, but sometimes there are like horsehair chairs that are also really, really slippery. And I always wonder exactly what the point of chairs like that is. I suppose they could be made in an era where people like didn't lean back the way that we do in chairs now, where the back of a chair was simply there for like to make it clear it was a chair and you were meant to perch on the front edge of it, like women in bustles. I've always thought about that, what it must have been like to sit in an ordinary chair during an era where you wore bustles and big skirts. You'd have to have been perched right on the very edge, so your back wouldn't come anywhere near the back of the chair. But the other one that I hate are those bar stools. Like, I don't understand owning a dining table that has bar stools at it. It's one thing if you've got a center island and you get some stools for that. But I have really short legs, and almost without fail, the rungs at the bottom of those stools are too far down for my feet to reach when I'm sitting. So I just have to sit there dangling and sort of slowly sliding forward until I'm like off the chair. Oh man. And it does make you feel really vulnerable and really stupid. So I felt for Kat a lot, being put in this position when he's already just not feeling super confident about everything. I mean, let's break down everything that has been going wrong for Kat. And it's really, if you have a pro and con list as to, you know, events in his life, the pros is really going to be quite short. So he says, "Good morning." And Crestomancy's like, "Is it? Because you look like you don't think so." And he says, "And though I fear you probably have as little moral sense as your wretched sister, I wondered if I could trust you." "Nobody's ever trusted me before," Kat said cautiously. "But it might be worth trying, don't you think?" suggested Crestomancy. "I ask because I'm going to start you on witchcraft lessons." And Kat, of course, believes that he is not adept at magic, and that if he is given official lessons, it's going to become very apparent very quickly that he's not adept at magic. And essentially thinks like, one, this is going to out the fact that he's not good at this. Two, he's spending pretty much all of his spare time lately, like, what's the word I want? Scheming, I guess, with Janet as to how they can get themselves out of the various predicaments that they are in. And the last thing he wants is to be under Crestomancy's eye. And he tries, it is such a weird, if I had more time, I would just read this entire conversation out loud to you. Because I love how much Kat tries to convince Crestomancy that he is like evil and black-hearted and can't be trusted with magic, and that I would hurt people on purpose and you'd be putting the means into my hands. And he says something about how he liked a lot of the things that Gwendolyn did, even though they were clearly terrible. And Crestomancy's like, "Oh, I did too. One wondered what she would think of next. How about her procession of nasties? Or those 4 apparitions?" Kat shivered. He felt sick to think of them. "Precisely," said Crestomancy, and to Kat's dismay, he smiled warmly at him. "Right, we'll let Michael start you on elementary witchcraft on Monday." So this is just how it's going to go. There's no stopping this whole thing, and he is just in quite a state at the thought of having to fake his way through this and then be found out and have to explain everything else that's been going on as well. And him and Janet are both not really in a great mood once they get back together, because she was in class and has answered some things really, really wrongly. And, you know, she was supposed to be wrong about some things because she's keeping up the pretense that she is Gwendolyn. But she's wrong about some things that don't, like, they're so basic that it's drawing some attention. So Janet is, and listen, I 100% side with Janet. I just want to say this. Janet is really irritated with Gwendolyn. She like holds all of this against Gwen and talks about her in a really snide way every time her name comes up, which I think is more than fair. I just don't understand how Kat can be as weirdly loyal, and loyal doesn't even feel like the right word. It's almost like Kat is purposefully misremembering what Gwendolyn was like. He thinks about how he misses her, especially at one point when Janet has like this really fierce expression on her face. It reminds him of his sister, and he's just like, oh, I miss Gwen and her crazy self. But a lot of the time he is embarrassed by her, or just generally feels like the way that she behaves is reflecting on him, and he hates that. You know, they go into town after her prank with the church, and people are moving their children out of her way, but then when he's by himself, he notices that people are still doing that when it's just him, and he's really saddened by that. And I just don't understand. And this is something that maybe is lost on me because I don't have siblings. So this may be what it's like if you have somebody that you know well, that you've grown up with, even if you don't really like them, you still get really defensive of them and still like miss them even though they are terrible. I just don't understand that. It's one of those things that I think probably is like, you know, how love tends to work. It's just not a logical thing. And because it's something that falls way outside of my experience with family, there's no way to put myself in that position where I understand why Kat is as resentful of Janet as he is, because he flat out thinks that to himself later, that he resents her, and is getting defensive of Gwendolyn over and over again, as if Gwendolyn did not put Janet here. She did this, dude. She's the one that fucked it all up and put you in this position. How can you not hold her accountable for that and be mad at Janet, who is simply a victim of Gwendolyn doing whatever the fuck she wants as usual? So the way that their relationship carries on is really frustrating to read, because she is so open with the fact that she is irritated and he is so indignant, and I can't understand why he isn't on her side, because they are both in the position of having been put in a shitty place because of his sister being incredibly selfish and impulsive and having no self-control whatsoever. So anyway, that does come a little later, but I just wanted to mention it because there's like a hint of it here in this conversation. But at this point, they're in Kat's room, and this dude comes in. He's brought in by Mary. Will Suggins, Euphemia's young man. And he is a little bit adept at magic himself. And he is very irritated with Kat because Kat turned his mother into a toad. And he works at a bread baker's. And what he does is so strange. He says, I'm a fair warlock myself, and grabs a piece of dough out of his pocket. For a moment, he shaped it vigorously in both powerful hands. Then he rolled it into a ball and threw it at Kat's feet. It landed on the carpet with a soft plop. Kat looked at it in great apprehension, wondering what it was supposed to do. That'll lie there, said Will Suggins, until 3 o'clock Sunday. Sunday's a bad time to be at witchcraft, but it's my free day. I shall be waiting for you then in Bedlam Field in the form of a tiger. I make a good tiger. You can turn yourself into something as large as you like, or small and fast if you prefer, and I'll teach you that lesson, whatever you are. But if you don't come to Bedlam Field in the form of something, that lump of dough will start to work, and you'll be a frog yourself for as long as I feel like keeping you that way. Well, what an interesting little piece of magic. He's going to turn him into a frog with a piece of dough. I love this. I love the idea of like getting into a job and modeling the way your magic functions after whatever you know best, which would be whatever your job is, you know? And it's just such a wild idea. It's making me think of like, you know, all of the different jobs out there that you could do something like this with. You know, a makeup artist could do something with makeup. Or, well, me as a podcaster, I'm thinking like, well, I could just speak my spells, but that's nothing new. I don't know how that would work. But yeah, it's a really fun little outside the box sort of thinking, and I enjoy that a lot. And Janet tries to like get the dough up off the floor, and it has grown into the carpet. So there's really no way they'd have to cut a hole through it in order to get it up and off the floor. And, oh, sorry, my phone is ringing because everybody likes to call me right when I'm recording every single time, without fail. So this is when she says, if you'll forgive my saying so, I've stopped loving your sugar-coated sister even one tiny bit. It was my fault, said Kat. I shouldn't have lied about Euphemia. That's what got me in this mess, not Gwendolyn. Mess is not a strong enough word, said Janet. On Sunday, you get mauled by a tiger. On Monday, it comes out that you can't do magic. And if the whole story doesn't come out then, it will on Wednesday, when Mr. Bedlam calls for his money. Do you think fate has something up its sleeve for Tuesday, too? I suppose if you go meet him on Sunday in the form of yourself, he can't hurt you much, can he? It's better than waiting to be turned into a frog. And Kat says that he would go as a flea. He'd scratch himself to bits trying to find me, which is pretty genius. I love it. I love that idea, and I really kind of want that to happen, but I suspect it's not gonna. So they had been working on a little spell earlier to test out if Kat can do any sort of basic magic in order to sort of prepare for the class, that maybe he can fake it better than they have been hoping. And the spell that they had worked on was getting a mirror to float in midair. And at this point, Janet turns around and sees that it's floating and is really excited about it. But Kat is not at all moved and just assumes that it was probably Janet. He's like, you're the same as Gwendolyn, so you're bound to be able to work spells. But changing into things won't be in either of those books. That's advanced magic. Then I'll do the spell to get the mirror down, said Janet. Not that I want to be a witch. The more I see of witchcraft, the more it just seems an easy way to be nasty. Which, girl, that does seem true, right? Like, I expect that it depends on the person, like anything. But it's... Oh, wow, I'm about to soapbox for a second in a very unexpected direction. It reminds me a little bit of gun control. A lot of people defend the fact that we have, you know, the Second Amendment, whatever. I'm going to set all of that aside and just mention that most people do not have good self-control. That's just a fact. I absolutely put myself in that category. My self-control isn't great. I have a very bad temper. And when my temper is roused, I get that kind of shaky, rageful urge to do violence. I've never been in a fight, but I don't think I am a person you want to have a gun on her when she gets angry. Because I feel like a gun just sort of gives you a shortcut to fuck your life up. And that is what I think people don't understand when they try and compare having a knife and a gun. A knife, granted, is very dangerous, but the kind of damage that you can do when you have a knife versus a gun is not to be compared at all. Sure, you can still kill someone with a knife. You can still kill somebody with a computer monitor. Like, let's be real. Anything can be turned into a weapon. But if I have road rage and somebody like cuts me off and gets out of their car and starts getting in my face and I feel like I'm being threatened, and I have a knife, the ending of this is probably going to be pretty different than if I had a gun. And that seems to be, when you read about like shooting deaths that are not, drug related or gang related or whatever, it has always this like tone of, I didn't mean for it to escalate that far. And that's how I feel about magic, is that probably it's so easy to make life miserable for somebody that you are able to act on an impulse in a way that you otherwise would not be able to, and thus do things that you can't take back or that are really dangerous and could ruin your life as much as the person that you are doing it to. And I just, I'm not sitting here trying to say that they should go around this whole country and take away everybody's magic the way that they did with Gwendolyn. But I do think it's a shame that people have these abilities when they are children and don't have... There's nothing in this world like there is in Harry Potter, for example, where you can detect somebody doing magic off campus when they're underage. There's nothing to sort of mitigate what they can do to each other. So Gwen and Julia are able to just go at it with like taunting one another and making each other miserable with no holds barred, as long as they keep it secret from the teacher, which is apparently quite easy to do. And I don't know. So I'm really Team Janet, and I think gun control is necessary because people are mostly terrible. Having one gun in your home for self-defense is not the same thing as having a concealed carry weapon in your car or on your hip at all times. So that's my soapbox, and I'm stepping off it now. So Janet doubled Magic for Beginners inside out so that it could have been any book and waved it at Kat. "Come into the garden, Maud," she proclaimed. Taking this as an invitation, Miss Bessemer opened the door and came in. She was carrying an armful of things with a chipped teapot hanging off one finger. "The furnishings I promised you, loves." "Oh," said Janet. "Oh, thanks so much. We were just having a poetry reading, "And I made sure you were talking to me," Miss Bessemer said, laughing. "My name's Maud. Will these be all right on the bed?" Now that's an interesting thing. Come into the garden, Maud. And then Miss Bessemer's name is Maud and she's standing right there? What's up with that? There's all these little moments like this in these chapters. I'm going to need to speed things up here. I'm realizing I'm 25 minutes in and I haven't even gotten past chapter 12. Anyway, they look through all of the stuff that Miss Bessemer brings for them for the playhouse. None of it is anything valuable that they could sell in order to pay back Mr. Baslam. And they are now trying to get the mirror down. And there's nothing for it. They're not able to do it. They're actually able to grab onto it and hang. And it will like kind of slide around the room. Janet discovered the best ride was to be had by standing on the chest of drawers and jumping. Then, provided you kept your feet up, you could swing across the room and land on Kat's bed. They were whirling together across the carpet, tangled up and laughing a good deal when Roger knocked at the door and came in. So, Roger comes in and wants to play, and they let him, and I really appreciated that because I wasn't sure, there's been so much like friction between these two sets of brothers and sisters that I kind of was like, are they going to tell him to go away just because they have their own secret workings of other things going on? And I feel like that would look even more suspicious. But no, they let him in. And it turns out that he is bringing a letter from Mr. Nostrum. And Kat is really, really excited because he thinks that they can ask Mr. Nostrum for all the help they need and that this will be an answer to their prayers in a lot of ways. I could not... Kat... Okay, let me take a sip of tea and gather my thoughts here for a second. I am having trouble with Kat as the main character. Not to say that I feel like she's written this wrong or something like that. I'm just saying that Kat's mind works in a lot of ways that I don't understand. He jumps to conclusions that I feel like there is no evidence for. And I don't know if that's indicative of who he is as a person, or if Diana Wynne Jones expects me to think a certain thing that he does also. Like, I can't decide, basically, to boil it down, whether or not Jones wants me to think the way Kat does. If she wants me to agree with the assessments he's making. If she wants me to have the same expectations that he has. I just don't really know, because he's over here excited about Mr. Nostrum. And I don't know why, because this man has not been a friend to you. And he hasn't even really been a friend to Gwen. Like, you addressed in the first chapters how Gwen basically, like, used Mr. Nostrum as much as she could to, like, get ahead with her training. And then was probably just going to quickly drop him like a hot potato as soon as she got the chance also. And the fact that that he is thinking so highly of your sister, who has done such shady shit, means to me that you should be suspecting him more than anything, because he's an adult. And that makes it even worse that he's this, like, selfish and willing to do God knows what in order to get his way. So, yeah, this whole thing is just, it's a really weird reaction that he has. Nothing could convince Janet that salvation was at hand. Kat was quite sure it was. He went to sleep rejoicing and woke up happy. He still felt happy, even when he trod on the lump of dough and it was cold and frog-like under his foot. Again, unless he's feeling happy for unrelated reasons that have to do with magic that we do not yet know about, I just don't understand why he thinks that this guy is going to help. So anyway, they're heading out to the village, him and Janet. And she says, "You've been brought up with all this magic, and you're used to it, but I'm not. And what scares me is that it's forever. And it scares me even more that it isn't forever. Suppose Gwendolyn gets tired of her new world and decides to move on again. When that happens, off we shall be dragged, a whole string of us doubles, and I'll be having to cope in her world, and you'll have all your troubles over again with a new one." "Oh, I'm sure that won't happen," Kat said, rather startled at the possibility. "She's bound to come back soon." "Oh, is she?" said Janet. Janet all the way. Like, seriously, what is it with you, dude, that you think that she's coming back? I mean, maybe. I personally hope so, simply because I want her to be held responsible for the shit she's done, but I don't see that. So here comes Mr. Nostrum. They go into the White Hart where he is staying. And when Kat gets a look at Mr. Nostrum after having not seen him for some time, he's sort of startled by how seedy and shabby are the words used this man looks. And it seems like that is enough to get him reconsidering whether this guy is going to be as much of a help to them as he was initially thinking. I was going to say they, but Janet doesn't think this. So Mr. Nostrum says this is very interesting. To come straight to the point and not beat about the bush, we find, as we rather feared we would, that we are quite unable to make use of those 3 signatures which you were kind enough to donate to me for services rendered in the tuition line. The person who inhabits that castle yonder, whose name I disdain to say, signs his name under an unbreakable protection. You may call it prudent of him, but I fear it necessitates our using Plan 2, which was why, my dear Kat, we were so glad to arrange for you to live at the castle." Well, we were so glad to arrange for you to live at the castle makes it sound like he wasn't initially invited. But I don't think that's true, because Crestomancy came to Kat and talked to him for a moment, even though it's not clear to Kat yet that it was Crestomancy. He finds out later. "What is Plan 2? said Janet. And he's like, "Well, we've talked about it already." And she's like, yeah, I know, but tell him what it is. And then, I love this. How shall I best go about it? He thought, smoothing his frizzy wings of hair as his habit was. Somehow, the way he did it showed Kat that whatever Mr. Nostrum was going to tell him, it would not quite be the truth. It was in the movement of Mr. Nostrum's hands, and in the very sit of his silver watch chain across his shabby, rounded waistcoat. Well, young Chant, this is the matter in a nutshell. There is a group, a clique, a collection of people, headed by the master of the castle, who are behaving very selfishly in connection with witchcraft. They are keeping all the best things to themselves, which of course makes them very dangerous, a threat to all witches, and a looming disaster to ordinary people. For instance, take dragon's blood. You know that it is banned. These people, with that person at their head, had it banned, and yet, mark this well, use it daily themselves. And here is my point. They keep tight control of the ways to get to the worlds where dragon's blood comes from. An ordinary necromancer like myself can only get it at great risk and expense, and our exotic suppliers have to endanger themselves to get it for us. And the same goes for almost any product from another world. Now I ask you, young Chant, is that fair? No. And I'll tell you why not, young Eric. It's not fair that the ways to other worlds should be in the hands of a few. That is the crux of the matter, the ways to other worlds. We want them opened up, made free to everyone. And that is where you come in, young Chant. The best and easiest way, the broadest gateway to elsewhere, if I may put it like that, is a certain enclosed garden in the grounds of this said castle. I believe you have been forbidden to enter it. Yes, said Kat, we have been. And consider how unfair, said Mr. Nostrum. The master of that place uses it every day and travels where he pleases. So what I want you to do, young Chant, and this is all Plan 2 amounts to, is to go into that garden at 2:30 precisely on Sunday afternoon. Can you promise me to do that? What good would that do? Asked Kat. It would break the seal of enchantment these dastardly persons have set on the gateways to elsewhere, Mr. Nostrum said. I've never quite understood, Janet said, with a very convincing wrinkle in her forehead, how Kat could break the seals just by going into the garden. Mr. Nostrum looked a little irritated. By being an ordinary innocent lad, of course. My dear Gwendolen, I have stressed to you over and over again the importance of having an innocent lad at the center of Plan 2. You must understand. Will you, by this simple act, young Chant, set your sister and people like her free to do as they need in the practice of magic? No. Don't hand people like Gwendolen AK-47s. I'm just saying, this is a bad idea. I'm really glad that Kat at least seems to have the understanding enough to realize as Mr. Nostrum is speaking that this guy is probably lying to him, and seems to be sort of reassessing all of his estimations of the man. And Janet, for her part, is very convinced that this is the worst idea in the entire world. Kat asks, could you turn me into a flea? Could you lend us 20 pounds? And basically Mr. Nostrum is like, anything. Just go into that garden. And I have to say, it feels like he's promising him anything because Kat is going to die. And that they're willing for it to be him because they know he has spare lives. But I don't really know why, if he has a spare life, Mr. Nostrum would still have to uphold his end of the deal. And he just doesn't seem concerned about it. The way he promises him whatever he wants just makes me feel like Nostrum doesn't plan on ever having to come through on his end of things. So at this point, Janet insists that they leave. Mr. Nostrum tries to keep her there, and she's like, we really have to go. And he doesn't really offer up any sort of resistance to that because it seems he's pretty used to her bossing him around. And when they head out, Mr. Baslam is there, and he is still poking and prodding at them about getting his money. But that's just for a reminder. Then they pass by Will Suggins, who comes out and just stares at them to remind them about what he wants to do. And Kat says, I think that I'm going to have to do what he asks. Don't, said Janet, though I must say I can't see what else we can do. About the only thing left is running away, said Kat. Then let's do that at once, said Janet. They did not exactly run. They walked briskly out of the village on the road Kat thought pointed nearest to Wolvercote. When Janet objected that Wolvercote was the first place anyone at the castle would think of looking, Kat explained about Mrs. Sharp's grand contacts in London. He knew Mrs. Sharp would smuggle them away somewhere, and no questions asked. He made himself very homesick by talking of Mrs. Sharp. He missed her dreadfully. So, remember all of that. As they're walking, they decide that they're going to hitchhike. And this is really interesting. The moment that they have, put out their thumb, a car rolls up, and it turns out that it is Julia, Roger, and Millie. And Millie seems to be quite aware that they were trying to run away. It's not like they've been gone so long. It hasn't been 4 hours. The sun's not going down. They haven't packed a bunch of things. They just walked away from town with the intent to run away. And somehow she knows about it. And Janet is the one that puts this together. Again, Kat just seems so damn dense. And also, she's the one that points out later on that Crestomancy seems to come to show up anywhere that his name is said out loud. And again, Kat doesn't really believe her, but she's like, it's way too big a coincidence to think that he just happens to be strolling by whenever he's mentioned. So it seems like Crestomancy and Millie each have their very specific abilities, and hers has something to do with being the caretaker of the household. And I find that really compelling. And Julia apologizes as well for terrorizing Janet because she feels like she's the reason that Janet decided to run away. I really like that, to be honest, because Julia, if this were still Gwendolyn, I would completely excuse Julia for just being good, go. Her being glad that she wasn't going to have to deal with this bitch anymore would be more than understandable. But instead, she seems genuinely contrite about it. And I kind of admire that, it takes a certain sort of person to come to their senses when they have that big a grudge against somebody, and when that grudge is sort of justified, as this one is. And I'm not sure that I would have been the same in Julia's place. So they go home, and tea is waiting, and it turns out that Mrs. Sharp is here to visit. And this is another good moment. Kat keeps, it feels like romanticizing things in his head over and over again with various people. And then when he sees them, he realizes that he was mistaken. He is still very, very fond of her. It's not that seeing her makes him realize, oh, you're trash. But he is able to be fond of her without seeing something that isn't there. Without basically depending on her for his sort of salvation here. Kat thought she had convinced herself she had brought him up from a baby. After all, she had known him since he was born. So she's talking about selling off the cat that Gwen turned. I don't know if you all remember, but Kat was playing the fiddle, taking lessons, and Gwen got so irritated at the fact that he was really bad at playing that she came into his room and turned the fiddle into a cat. And she wound up selling it for £5. He was ever such a funny little man who bought him. While we were waiting to catch the old cat, you know how he never would come if you wanted him, this little man kept at me, telling me all about stocks and shares and capital investment and such like. Things I never could understand. He told me what I ought to be doing with that £5 he was giving me, and making my head go round with it. Well, I didn't think too much of it, but I thought I'd have a go. And I did what he said, as far as I could remember. And do you know that 5 pounds has brought in 100? 100 pounds he got me. So that's what's his face, right? Their teacher who just never seems to talk about anything else, I feel like. And he wants this cat for some reason, which I feel like has to mean something. And I'm really like, is this cat? Is this, like, did he switch places with an actual cat and not remember? Like, there's just so much potential for weird shit, guys. I can't decide what's too weird and what's not. Cat watched Mrs. Sharp as she chattered on. He was puzzled and sad. He was still just as fond of Mrs. Sharp, but he knew it would have been no use whatsoever running away to her. She was a weak, dishonest person. She would not have helped them. She would have sent them back to the castle and tried to get money out of Crestomancy for doing it. And the London contacts she was boasting of at that moment were just boasts. Cat wondered how much he had changed inside and why he had, enough to know all this. But he did know, just as surely as if Mrs. Sharp had turned around in her gilded chair and assured him of it herself. And it upset him. So yeah, I, as frustrated as I get with Cat over and over again in these couple of chapters, when there are moments like that, I do have a lot more sympathy for him, because it seems like his mind plays tricks on him. Like, he tries almost to be too compassionate to people. And when he has these revelations, it's overdue and you're glad he had them. But it is a sad moment. I mean, it's sad anytime you realize that you thought better of somebody than they really deserved. And in his case, it's something very specific about being young and looking up to somebody who had taken care of him. And that sort of revelation is particularly painful, I think, because it's just, you want the people in charge, you want them to know what they're doing. And you want them to be better, because that gives you a sense of security since you depend on them. And he's realizing that there isn't really anyone out there that they know of. And I say that they know of because he doesn't really believe this of Crestomancy, even though I do. It's a bummer that Cat is, like, one by one having to cross off names on a very short list of adults that he thinks he can go to with problems. Let's see. Janet was signaling so hard that she had something of urgency to say to Cat. Janet was signaling so hard that she had something urgent to say that Cat had to refuse Julia's invitation. I'm awfully sorry. We've got to talk about something Mrs. Sharp told us. And don't say Gwendolen owns me. It's not that at all. We forgive you, Roger said. We might forgive Gwendolen, too, with luck. Mrs. Sharp said I wasn't on any account to do what Mr. Nostrum says, Cat told her. I think she came specially to tell me. So, yeah, I really want to know how Mrs. Sharp knows what's going on here, because Mr. Nostrum does not seem like the type to confide in her what his plan is. And I don't know if Gwendolen would ever have told Mrs. Sharp herself. How would she have found this out? Eavesdropping, maybe? But yeah, Janet's like, well, it's not like Mrs. Sharp is such a upfront, straightforward person with good intentions. So if she thinks that something is really dangerous and that you shouldn't do it, it has to be really, really bad. You'd be safe from Crestomancy and Mr. Ballum if we went back to my world. And I'm sure Will Suggins couldn't turn you into a frog there either, could he? No, said Cat dubiously, but I don't think Mr. Nostrum was telling the truth. All sorts of things could be wrong. Don't I know it, said Janet, especially after Mrs. Sharp. Mum and Dad would be another difficulty, too, though I'm sure they'd like you when they understood. They must be fearfully puzzled by my dear replacement by now as it is. And I did have a brother who died when he was born, so perhaps they'd think you were his dear replacement. That's funny, said Cat. I nearly died being born, too. Then you must be him, said Janet. They'd be delighted, I hope. And the best of it would have been that Gwendolyn would have been dragged back here to face the music and serve her right. This is all her fault. No, it isn't, said Kat. Yes, it is, said Janet. She did magic when she was forbidden to, gave Mr. Blastoff dud earrings for something she wasn't supposed to have anyway, dragged me here, turned Euphemia into a frog, and got you into an even worse mess than I'm in. Will you stop being so loyal for a moment and notice? Yes, girl. Amen. I expect she used dragon blood because she's asking, how could she even have traveled to another world after her magic's taken away? She still had them. Mr. Saunders has a whole jar of dragon's blood up in his workshop. Why didn't you say so? Janet yelled, jumping around on her stool. She really might have been Gwendolyn. At the sight of her fierce face, Kat missed Gwendolyn more than ever. He resented Janet. She had been ordering him about all day. Then she tried to make out it was all Gwendolyn's fault. He shrugged mulishly and went very unhelpful. You didn't ask. But can you get some? Maybe, but I don't want to go to another world, really. Janet drew a long, quiet breath and managed not to tell him to stay and be turned into a frog then. She made a very ingenious face at the mirror and counted to 10. Kat, she said carefully, we really are in such a mess here that I can't see any other way out. Can you? No, Kat admitted grudgingly. I said I'd go. And thank you, dear Janet, for your kind invitation, I notice, Janet said. To her relief, Kat grinned. This is when they start talking about Millie being a witch, and probably a good one, like a nice witch. And they start to, let's see. Janet had found the bundle of letters addressed to Miss Caroline Chant. The red book of matches was tucked in front of it. Janet took the little book carefully out and chucked the letters back into the box. 9 matches, she said, and good Lord, Kat, 5 of them are burned. Look. He saw there were indeed 9 matches in it. The heads of the first 2 were black. The third was charred right down to the base. The fourth had a black head again. But the 5th had burned so fiercely that the paper behind was singed and there was a hole in the sandpaper beneath it. It was a wonder if the whole book had not caught fire, or at least the last 4 matches. They were as new, however. Their heads were bright red with yellowish oily paper below and bright white cardboard below that. It does look like a charm of some kind, Kat said. I know it is, said Janet. These are your 9 lives, Kat. How did you come to lose so many? They can't be, he said. Even if he had 9 lives, he knew he could only have lost 3, and that was counting the time Gwendolyn gave him cramps. The other 2 would be when he was born and on the paddle boat. But as he thought this, Kat found he was remembering those 4 apparitions coming from the flaming bowl to join Gwendolyn's gruesome procession. 1 had been a baby, 1 dripping wet. The crippled one had seemed to have cramps. But why had there been 4 of them when 5 matches were burned? Kat began shivering, and this made him all the more determined to prove Janet wrong. You couldn't have died in the night once or twice without noticing? Janet wondered. Of course I didn't. Kat reached down and took the book. Look, I'll prove it to you. He tore the 6th match off and dragged it along the sandpaper. Janet leaped up, shrieking to him to stop. The match burst into flame. So, almost at the same instant, did Kat himself. Yo! This motherfucker just lit that shit up. Guy, be a little more cautious, dude. I can't understand how people in a world where magic is all over the place can be this casual about shit. Holy God, guys, calm it down. Jesus. So he lights up and there is nothing to put him out. It's like Janet does everything that you would normally do to put out a fire, rolls him up in a carpet, all of these things to try and smother the flames. It doesn't work. And then she shouts for Crestomancy, who, sure enough, shows up the minute that his name is called. He helps to drag Kat over to the bathtub, and she has the water turned on. And basically the water at first, just sears off him, like turns into steam. And then as it begins to bubble up around him, it starts to boil. It's pretty intense. As the bath began to fill, Cat seemed to be turning and threshing in a pool of sunshine. He boiled it into golden bubbles. The room filled with steam. Coils of smoke drifted up from the bath, smelling thick and sweet. It was the same smell that Janet remembered from the morning she had first found herself there. Oh. Oh no. I think I might have figured out exactly how this bitch traveled to another world. Oh, really? I don't care for that. I hate Gwendolyn so much. So, Crestomancy said, "Don't you understand? You shouldn't go telling him things like this until the castle has had time to work on him. He wasn't ready to understand. You've given him the most appalling shock." What does that mean? Don't tell him until the castle has had time to work on him. Work what? Like, is there latent magic in him that this castle can somehow, like, pull out? Or, like, what about the castle would make him more ready to hear this? So he sends her off to get some brandy and a pot of tea. "Cat, will you listen to me? You've only got 3 lives left now." Cat knew that voice. "You told me I'd got 5 when you spoke to me through Miss Larkins," he grumbled. "Yes, but you've only got 3 now. You'll have to be more careful." Oh, was it you?" "Yes. You took a long time recognizing me, didn't you? But then, I didn't know you straight away when I saw you either. I think you can come out of the water now." Cat lay back, limp but luxurious, and nodded. "Thanks. You've never called me Cat before." "Perhaps I should have done. You just might have understood. You do understand now?" "I know I have 9 lives, but how?" "You have 3, said Crestomancy. "Get that into your head. You did have 9. In some manner and by someone they were put into that book of matches, and that book I am now going to put in my secret safe, sealed with the strongest enchantments I know. But that will only stop people using them. It won't stop you losing them yourself." And he explains that the people who have multiple lives like this, that 9 lives, are the people who do not have a duplicate of themselves living in any other world. Duplicate's the wrong word. He uses the word counterpart, so that's good. I'll use that. So then the lives that would have been spread out over a whole set of worlds get concentrated in one person, and so do all the talents that those other 8 people might have had. So Crestomancy tells Cat that the only other person he knows than Cat who has 9 lives is himself, and then tells them that he only has 2 because he was even more careless than Cat. Now I have to take care to keep each life separately in the safest place I can think of. It's like Horcruxes. It's really weird. So this whole thing leads to Cat being like coddled and fussed over, which he actually really enjoys. And I wasn't sure how he was going to like that, because it seems like in many ways, whenever the attention is fully on Cat, he just gets really uncomfortable. But it seems with something like this, where he is able to just be open and honest about what happened, and they are open and honest with him in return, he is much more at ease, and I appreciate that. At this point, we get the this is questionable. So Crestomancy reveals that he is able to see them in the mirror in her room, in Janet's room. And later on, she's talking about it with Cat, and Cat says, "Oh, I'm sure he can't hear. Otherwise, he would know all about everything that happened with Gwen." Well, my theory is that he can hear, and that he does know everything that happened with Gwen, and he just hasn't told these 2 that he knows. I'm not sure why he wouldn't tell them, unless this is part of his overall plan in some way. I don't know. But they assume something. And the first time I read this, I was like, yeah, that seems right. But I reread it and I was like, you know what? There's no reason to think that he doesn't know. So they're just kind of like going with that to make themselves feel better, I think. And that might not actually be true. So they decide that they're going to find some of this dragon's blood. I don't know why they want it, because they don't know what to do with it. It's one of those things that I feel like they're really putting the cart before the horse. They want to like risk stealing something that is like a controlled substance, basically, and super dangerous without any clear plan as to what they are actually going to do with it. And that makes so little sense to me, and I find it really, really frustrating. But they go up to, what's-his-face's room. And it's really more of a laboratory. And when they get up there, Mr. Saunders, there he is, because I keep forgetting his name. When they get up there, it seems like there is a creature that's like mummified on a table. And there's a rustling, and they look and see that it seems like it's like moving. And Kat says, it did that before. And then all of a sudden, this thing gets to his feet and yawns. And it's a tiny baby dragon that can talk. And it's great. And this little dragon does not want them to take dragon blood. He just he's like, how would you feel if people were just coming in and stealing human blood to play around with? And Janet's sort of like, well, I mean, where I come from, taking human blood is really not a big deal. Like all the doctors do it all the time. And he says, well, my mom was killed by blood stealers, and I was too small to hold enough blood, so they just left me. And I think maybe that would make you understand a little bit better why stealing blood feels very personal. And she's like, yeah, I do, actually. And she asks what he does, this little dragon, to help Saunders. I find old things he can't find himself. The dragon fell into a flickering croon. I fetch him animals from the abyss, old golden creatures, things with wings, pearl-eyed monsters from the deep sea, and whispering plants from long ago. It stopped and looked at Janet with its head on one side. That was easy, it remarked to Kat. I've always wanted to do that, but no one let me before. I wish I was bigger. I could eat her now. Kat took an alarmed look at Janet and found her staring like a sleepwalker with a silly smile on her face. Oh, shit. This dragon just straight hypnotized her. And keeps joking around about how maybe it'll just have a little nibble. Maybe it'll just have a little bite out of her. And Kat realizes that it's sort of joking around, but is also kind of like, yeah, you might, though. I don't care for this. So he picked up a little china crucible from the next bench and starts to scoop out some of this dragon's blood because it's like a powder. Michael says dragon's blood always does harm somewhere, even when an adept uses it. If you're not careful, it costs a life. It costs a life. It costs a life. Gwendolyn, what have you been doing? Oh, I'm super mad at her. I hate this. Well, I suppose Crestomancy manages all right with 2 lives, Janet said nervously. But he's rather special, said the dragon. It was standing on the very edge of the bench, rattling with anxiety. Its golden eyes followed Kat's hands as he wrapped the crucible in his handkerchief and pushed the bundle cautiously into his pocket. It seemed so worried that Kat went over to it and a little nervously rubbed it under the chin where it had been scratching. The dragon stretched at its neck and pressed against his fingers. It likes to be scratched like a little cat. It's so cute. So, it's really like this whole thing, guys. He seemed to have lost 3 of his lives so easily. That kept puzzling him. From the look of those matches, losing life number 5 ought to have been as much of a disaster as losing the 6th one, but he had not noticed it go at all. He could not understand it. His lives did not seem to be properly attached to him like ordinary people's. But at least he knew there were no other cat chance to be dragged into trouble in this world when he left it. So that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, I have to assume that the reason Mr. Nostrum was insistent on Kat living at the castle is because he knew that Gwendolyn was going to need her brother's multiple lives to work some of her spells. And that's super gross, and I hate Gwen so much more now, and I hate Mr. Nostrum. All of this is bad, and I'm very concerned that they think they're going to use his life with this dragon blood to get into the next world, but they don't. I don't know if they get to direct whose life is taken. They may take Crestomancy's, like, spare life, because he only has 2 now, and I don't know how he would react to that. I feel like that'd be really bad. Yeah, man. So like I said, there's only 2 chapters left. How can this wrap up? I don't understand how. But I guess we shall see. There's a dragon. You just drop a dragon into the 3rd to last chapter? Okay. Good Lord. But yeah, so this has been really fun to read, though, honestly. So thank you very much to Patricia for commissioning this. Super appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who dropped into this chat. And hopefully I will be seeing you all again soon with the final episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.